What up, what up, what up? Welcome to another episode of New Orleans Basketball, New Orleans Network podcast. As always, I am your host, Raphael Rattler, joined by my fellow middle brother, Garrick Rattler, man. What's popping with you? What's changed?
I don't know, man. It seems like it hasn't been that long since we've done a podcast, but it feels like a lot of lifetimes ago because it feels like a lot of things have changed. First of all, the entire city of New Orleans is in a frenzy because obviously the Super Bowl is here, and the Saints are not in the Super Bowl, in case you were asking. But yeah, it's you see all of these different fans from all these different teams walking around, and I think Jameis is a fan favorite, but that man is having the time of his life. He is living the best life in New Orleans with all this attention on the city. He's been kind of like the NFL's ambassador to New Orleans, but man, it's been phenomenal just to see everybody reveling around and enjoying themselves and being safe and things. And we haven't even gotten to the weekend yet, so it's been an amazing sight to see in New Orleans, and it's crazy because with all of the stuff going on downtown, the Pels are kind of like on a Grammy road trip, kind of like how the Lakers leave and the Lakers and Clippers leave for the road trips because of what's going on. Like the Saints the city is using the Super Bowl is using the city basically. So the Pelicans are out of town and there's no games, but it feels like the NBA has kind of it's like a chase down block. The NFL during Super Bowl week because the NBA trade deadline was absolutely insane. Was the craziest. This has been the Raph. So I'm 32 years old. I'm good for about 25 years of NBA history. I would say that was when I started kind of knowing what was going on, the makings of the NBA, whatever the case is. And I have a couple of things in my life in the NBA history where I'm I remember where I was that time. I remember where I was during this and that event. Last Saturday night, I was at the Zulu Province Prince crew party with our father, and it was almost it was a bunch of people in tuxedos and Mardi Gras costumes celebrating themselves and jumping around and partying and drinking. And all the men just went still and started looking at their phones. Everybody almost every man in there was what? And I looked at my phone and I was oh, Shams got Shams got hacked. Yeah. And then everybody else was oh yeah, well, we can continue partying. And then he came back and was no, it's the truth. And it just was one of the most incredible moments, one of the most incredible shared experiences in that crew party. Seeing that Luka trade go down was just absolutely insane, right? And then obviously not to be outdone because the Pelicans are never out of the out of the news and out of the cycle. The Pelicans handled their own business as well yesterday, which we'll get into. And it's just what an insane trade deadline. Everybody was worried about the boogeyman that was the CBA and the second tax apron and things like that. And man, we've seen some of the most dramatic trades we could ever think of. So kudos to the NBA for never, ever being boring. So that's my spiel on what's been going on in my side of town. How's everything on your side, bro?
Well, you mentioned my side of the time, and I just happen to frequent in local Dallas, Texas. Things are not going well in Dallas, Texas right now. You talk about the Luka AD trade update. My phone, same type of thing. I was having dinner with some friends, and my phone just lit up. People saying I'm giving away my season tickets. And I'm what is happening? And I looked down and said, oh my. And I didn't believe. And to be honest with you, Garrick, I don't think I still believe. I have to see Luka play next to LeBron in LA and still be wow. But to be honest, between De'Aaron Fox going to San Antonio and Zach LaVine going to Sacramento and Jimmy Butler going to state, there's been so many. We probably need to do a whole move, just a reaction pod of all the trades with the new CBA coming out. You thought teams were gonna be minding their steps when it comes to trades, but they just found ways to trade big money for big money. So we need to do an entire reaction pod on that. But let's get into the Pelican news. Let's get into the things that transpired over the last 72 hours. I'm not even talking about the basketball games. Like the Pelicans in a row, they've lost in a lot of different facets. I'm not even talking about that. Let's just jump into it. So after 5.5 seasons, the Brandon Ingram and Zion Williamson era is over. As of yesterday, it's not finalized yet. The trade deadline has come and gone, but the reports are out. Brandon Ingram gets traded to Toronto. I'm just going to stop there. What's your initial reaction? Like, we were on this pod, we were like, we didn't see a trade partner. Out of nowhere, the Hawks and the Raptors seem to be in a bidding war. What's your first gut reaction seeing that Brandon Ingram is no longer New Orleans back?
Yeah, man, it's an insane thing that like Toronto came in out of nowhere. Like there were reports, but it just never felt like that was a fit, right? Like if you scour and you look, you're like, okay, I could see why they would be interested, but there's no way possible that they actually try and make this thing happen, right? Like there's just no way. But apparently, like they were serious, and the situation with it all, and obviously we'll get into it. Just like my first thought was, this is a team obviously who is not a free agent market, not a real big player in the free agent market. And we've seen Toronto kind of make this move on a grander scale before with Kawhi Leonard, right? To kind of bring him in, say to hell with to hell with what he might do afterwards. Gonna bring him in and sell him on the franchise and sell him on the mission and try to see if you can re-sign him at a later date. And especially with obviously the Pelicans up against the wall between letting Brandon Ingram, potentially walk for nothing and then getting something back for him. The price wasn't, crazy for Toronto. And so they made the move. And so, my first reaction was, finally, there's a resolution to this whole situation, right? Everybody, it got kind of ugly when you talk about, what is being said about Brandon Ingram, his value, whether it's from people, outside of the organization and what the GMs might be saying about Brandon Ingram. And then what, obviously what social media and fans are saying about him. It got kind of ugly. And I just think it's a good resolution for everybody that this got taken care of. Now, I do find it funny that the same people who've been on all the social media platforms and wherever you could hear people talk about basketball, talk about how Brandon Ingram, is not that good, and Brandon Ingram, is injury prone. And is not a ceiling raiser and things like that. And then those same people say, well, why didn't you get Giannis Antetokounmpo for trading Brandon Ingram? Where it's like, well, you've been crapping on him for 2 years. I'm sure you can't crap on him for 2 years and then I'll try to say, well, look, also you better go get the best trade package of all time for him. But I think again, it was time for the Pelicans to draw a line in the sand when it came to, when it comes to the footing the bill and the fits and things like that. And there was a line that they didn't want to cross. And it seems like they stuck to their laurels, and now Brandon Ingram is a Toronto Raptor. So, it is what it is. And, I think that the Pelicans now, have moved on and have shown tremendous faith in Trey Murphy, and obviously Trey Murphy is now paying that back, which we'll get into later. But now it's a new era, and it's a new pairing for Zion, new fits for Zion. Things the thought process around these guys needs to change a little bit, and here we are.
All right, a couple things stand out. You talk about the Pelicans having their price. Look at the contracts that the Pelicans have been signing as of late. Trey Murphy, we'll get into that, but that looks like a great deal. Herb Jones, one of the best contracts in the league. Zion, even though hasn't been on the court, it's still a good contract because there's a lot of outs. Then you look at the contracts that didn't happen, and it just so happened to be all the AD picks. Lonzo Ball priced himself out of New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
He's gone. Josh Hart priced himself out of New Orleans. He was gone. Brandon Ingram got to the point where he wanted more than the organization was willing to give, and now he's gone. And so you brought up a good point in terms of the return for the trade, because I think that was the biggest issue with the Luka trade, which we'll talk about later. But you talk about the return for this trade. Well, there's a couple of things to factor in, right? Like the return in a situation like this, where yes, it's an extremely talented player, and yes, Brandon Ingram is one of those guys that the Raptors obviously see as someone they can build around. But look at the details of what's going on. Brandon Ingram, the most likely, was not going to get a contract extension throughout this season from the New Orleans Pelicans. So the only thing they were going to do was go to free agency this summer and still probably offer the same amount. And then at that point, the Pelicans have no leverage at all. And so to be able to get something back, like a first rounder and a second rounder and expiring contract, so that you can have both cap space, which is one of the most valuable things going forward with the new CBA, but also have some different things you could potentially play with, or with a signing trade and things like that. I think that was the most you were going to get in this situation, where in all likelihood, Brandon Ingram was probably going to walk and take slightly more somewhere else, because that's what, he was out for. He was out to get paid, which he said himself. And so the price for the deal itself doesn't bother me. I think you're in a situation when your back was against the wall and you're trying to see if you can get something whether with nothing. To me, I'm curious on the fit with Toronto. I understand the mindset of putting a lot of wings. Toronto is a long team, and they have been. Usai Muziri has built a long team full of wings, and Brandon Ingram fits into that. They need some help scoring. They need some help facilitation. Scotty Barnes is an emerging star, and maybe you bring Brandon Ingram to help bring that along. But, like, is Brandon Ingram going to sign a long-term contract there? I don't know if that's the case. Is he going to be the 1-2 option? And if so, isn't that exactly what he was kind of dealing with in New Orleans? And so, like, I just don't know how that fits long term. But all in all, like, the immediate reaction is I didn't see this coming, because I just didn't think the Raptors were that serious.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I mean, when you look at Toronto and you look at, the deals that they've given out, right? Like they paid Emmanuel Quickly a lot of money. And I think what you saw with Golden State and Jimmy Butler is kind of sort of what you're going to see with the Raptors and Brandon Ingram, right? Like the Warriors were very desperate by all accounts to get that second star in next to Steph Curry. And in order to get Jimmy to resign, they gave him a 2-year extension with like 60 million, almost 60 million, a piece, right? You overpay for him to stay, right? And I think that's kind of, what Toronto's going to have to do, right? You already overpaid Emmanuel Quickly. Like, there's no way in the world that you don't at least try to give Brandon Ingram probably what, people in New Orleans would consider an overpay, and just to get him to stay, right? Like, that's what these kind of markets have to do. And so I see people, talking about how Toronto goes against the grain. Like, this is just something that they took a shot in the dark, right? They saw their team kind of middling, and seeing Scotty Barnes not have like the proper running mate. Obviously, RJ Barrett is there, and they have other guys, but not like to the level of Brandon Ingram, right? And so, I think it's a good spot for BI in the sense that, like, he gets to go play, not really. I don't want to call it important basketball, but like it's pressure-free basketball in Toronto for the rest of this season for sure, and probably moving forward, right? Like, I don't think they're going to be a title contender next year, but I do think the Pelicans were able to get something for a player who was going to be a free agent anyway. So instead of completely, losing him for anything. Again, I've always talked about cap space. Even if he left without getting anything back, it's still very valuable. Well, you still get that cap space, but you also get a first, a second, and potentially, if the deal has not been fully completed and announced and made official, so it's still, an opportunity for, the expansion of the, even after the trade deadline, expansion of the trade. who knows what you might get, right? It's already reported that people are calling the Pelicans about Kelly Olynyk and about Bruce Brown. Maybe you get some extra picks out of that. So you go from, you got Brandon, you got Bruce Brown and Kelly Olynyk in a first and the second two. All right, so you end up with a two first or first and 4 seconds and Kelly Olynyk who can help, or whatever it is that you trade, those guys for. But I do think the Pelicans were able to help themselves now. And I think, which we'll get into, obviously talking the emergence of Trey Murphy to come in and saw what he's done. I think the Pelicans were just ready to get something for Brandon Ingram and kind of turn the page over to this new kind of era of Pelicans basketball.
So you talk about a new era of Pelicans basketball, and I think that it brings up a really good point with this trade when you look at the construction of this roster. Did this trade reset their timeline? Like, who is the core of this team? Because if you look at who's remaining, right? DeJounte Murray, obviously devastating injury, the suffered ruptured Achilles, 28 years old, 3 more years on his contract. Herb Jones, 26 years old, 2 more years on his contract. Trey Murphy, 24 years old, 4 more years on his contract. Zion Williamson, 24 years old, 3 more years on his contract. Yves Macy on a rookie contract. That's your starting lineup kind of moving forward. And that's before you get to Jose Alvarado and Jordan Hawkins and Brandon Boston, who probably, and we'll get to, is probably going to get a contract in the next couple of days and things like that. And oh, by the way, the Pelicans have the second worst record in the league right now. So right now they're prime for a top 3 whatever pick, things like that. And so you're kind of in a position where you can compete, but also it's not like win or bust because most of your team is 24. So what are your thoughts on that, about this kind of being the new core of the team?
Yeah. I think, it's always been a younger team, right? Obviously CJ and his age and experience throws it off. But, the guys who you think going to be here the next couple, even when Brandon Ingram was here, was a younger core. But now that Brandon Ingram is gone, and you've kind of turned the page over to Trey Murphy and Zion, right? And Trey is kind of right now the de facto running mate, right? He is the Brandon Ingram to Zion right now. And so I do think that, this does kind of shift the focus from, the spacing issues that could Brandon Ingram and Zion fit? And you answer those questions. We've seen Zion and Trey Murphy are a natural fit already, right? Whether it's the 2-man game or whether it's, some other variation of getting those guys together, cross-court passes and things like that. This new version of Trey is like this. So I think now that you have kind of Trey and Zion as your guys now, you start focusing on what can you do after that, right? And obviously, like you talk about, you have a top 3 pick in a very loaded draft. Right now we talked about this last time. There's so many guys that I think that could plug in, especially with this Pelicans team. And again, I describe this team, as unique all the time. Here's yet another unique situation because, if Trey is this budding star, borderline all-star, borderline, like, could he, if you push the envelope, that's been my thing on Twitter about Trey now, is like, push the envelope, give him more touches, give him more responsibility, see how much he can handle. This is a team that you have guys who can compete at a high level, all NBA player all NBA defense type of player in Herb Jones, who's not playing, and all-star in DeJounte Murray, who's not playing. You have like the guys, and you have like the supporting cast, even with Brandon Ingram, gone. And so now with this pick that's coming up, again, this guy, whoever you're coming, who you get, if you can keep, again, if you can get Zion to have a healthy season, you don't need this guy, whoever, whether it's Cooper Flagg, whether it's Ace Bailey, Dylan Harper, VJ Edgecombe, some of the guys from across seas, some of the Auburn guys. Like, you don't need those guys to come in and save the franchise. Like, say you are the only guy that's on the team, as if like another, if Washington gets the number 1 pick or something like that. Like, you have to go save that franchise because there's derelict of talent. The Pelicans are not like, depth of talent. They have talent. And so now you focus on what's best for the team at this point, right? Like, I see some people talk about, you're traded into this draft again, dipping into this draft again with the pick that you just got and things like that. Like, you have a lot of different options, but they all revolve around, okay, what's coming into the team as opposed to how do we drive this team forward with Brandon Ingram and Zion. And so I think it's not a full reset because the guys were already young either way it went. But I do think it's a bit of a soft focus reset, right? Like, you're not worrying about how can you maximize the Brandon Ingram and Zion pairing. Now it's more so like, okay, can you get Zion healthy, and what can Trey do? And I think that's what the rest of this season, people talking about the rest of this season over, whatever, season's been over. Sorry to tell you, but season's been over if you're looking as far as wins and losses. But you do have like things that you can figure out for sure this season, pushing the envelope on Trey, seeing this Trey and Zion pairing as much as possible. Can you get Hawk going? And then you pivot and you turn to which one of these draft picks is the best at whatever you get. If you don't get one, like who's there to get? So I do think it's a soft focus reset of the timeline, but I do think like the core, like you just mentioned before we all started this, the core is still there, and the core is still relatively young, and you still got a lot of ammunition to get better and things like that.
Right. I look at what the team intended to do to start the season. Again, they started by saying, look at OKC, look at Boston. Got at all times, anyone in their rotation is a threat on offense, and they can guard their yard on defense. The Pelicans are slowly starting to get there, right? Obviously, people have come to me and asked about CJ McCollum on the move, things like that. It was always more likely for CJ to get moved next year than this year because he is an expiring contract next year, and he can still contribute for a team. So instead of trying to get him off the books and taking a huge loss for someone to take $33 million, wait till next year when he's a value point for you, and you can use him to either go get more players in the middle of the year or to get more draft picks and things like that. And so I think that was always the case. But to your point, outside of just those starting five that seem to be locked in for the foreseeable future and the draft pick that you get, like Carlo Makovich had his first start yesterday and he looked pretty good, right? And then you talk about they have 4 players on rookie contracts that you've yet to see what they're going to be, right? And I think with Brandon Ingram leaving the roster and more moves led to happen this summer and things like that, you're going to give those guys more and more opportunities to grow together as a core. Now, one guy in particular we have talked about so far, and I low-key kind of think he's a little bit of a piece why you're okay. Not saying he's as good of a player as Brandon Ingram, but you're okay with Brandon Ingram walking, is a guy like Brandon Boston, man. Like, coming out of high school, he was one of the most talented guys in that class. And obviously, he went to the Kentucky, went to the Clippers, didn't work out. But you've seen the things that you want from someone who's known more as a scorer than anything, right? Can you play off ball next to the talent when it's available? Okay. When the talent's not available, can you go get your own shot? Can you go create for other people? Okay. Can you defend as well? On the other end, like, can you give me enough? And he's got like a steal per game. And so, like, I look at a player like that, and again, he's not Brandon Ingram, but he has a Brandon Ingram-like skill set. So, like, what are your thoughts on, do you think that there was anything to, hey, we found a guy who can give us 60% of Brandon Ingram for 1/10 of the price? I think that this makes it a little bit easier to digest.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, Brandon Ingram is, again, I don't have to tell people how much of a hooper Brandon Ingram is. I don't have to tell people how much of a fan of Brandon Ingram I was, while he was here. I mean, this guy was somebody who you could roll the ball out and he could just get buckets on anybody at any point in time. I will miss the death by 1,000 cuts. I will miss Slim, calling him Soldier Slim. I will miss all of that. But I think if you look at what Brandon Ingram was doing, and what he was asked to do, and what he was asked to change around Zion, I do think that Brandon Boston can do a lot of what some of the things as far as scoring wise. I think Brandon Boston, in conjunction with what Trey Murphy has turned into and what you've seen from him lately, between the both of them, you should be able to get Brandon Ingram's production, if not more, because Trey shoots the 3 ball and so does Brandon Boston. And so I think, obviously Brandon Boston is a guy you could plug in. We saw him on times where he had to, had to start and he got in and scored 20 points and you ran up and down the floor and you did, and can score and fill the lanes and run with Zion and things like that. You saw those things. And so if you can plug him in and not have to pay him, some of the amount of money that Brandon Ingram was looking for, and you pair that with this emergence of Trey Murphy, who has started to show playmaking chops, which we were asking from Brandon Ingram, right? You wanted to see Brandon Ingram evolve to the 3-point line. You wanted to see him evolve his playmaking. You want to see evolve his, his defense and things like that. Well, Trey Murphy is doing that, except he's a more lethal shooter than Brandon Ingram. And so the fit next to the guy who, say what you want about him, and have whatever you want about him. I mean, the Pelicans believe in Zion, and Zion shows you things on the floor that make you want to believe in him. But next to him, having Trey Murphy and then having a guy that could come in and produce some points the way Brandon Boston does as a sub, where that offense shouldn't fall all the way off at points. I think that was kind of okay. Those two guys and combined. I think more so that, because obviously having Brandon Ingram and Brandon Boston is like night and day. Brandon Ingram is a much superior player, but Trey Murphy's ascension and Brandon Boston being able to come in and do the things, put the ball in the basket, be comfortable next to Zion, be comfortable next to Trey, be comfortable with DeJounte. I think having both of those combined makes it a little bit easier to let go of a guy who can get buckets the way Brandon Ingram can.
I think it's not even just those two. I would expand it to the other talent that you're adding around the roster as well. Like, I think one of the big issues, other than them just being on the court, like that's the biggest issue of it all. Like, you never know, like the biggest mystery of it all is you don't know if any of this would have worked because none of it was ever on the court, not even for 1 minute. You didn't get to see it at all. And even over the Zion and BI era, you really didn't get to see those two that much at all. So you really can't say if they will work together or not. But what you do know is that Brandon Ingram is a more on-ball player who needs the ball to be at his best in a lot of ways. And I think by the ascension of Trey Murphy, who doesn't need the ball to be at his best, but is growing in that area more than I think even the Pelicans thought so. But then the other things that you've added around the roster and ability to score. 2 years ago, we were looking at the roster and saying, hey, they're really great on defense, but no one can score. Now you're looking around and you guess who leads the team in 3-point percent? Jose Alvarado. So it's like you have different people that can add and contribute and can score in different ways. And with how the Pelicans payroll looks right now, I think they looked at it and said, we can get enough offense through everything else that we have available. So we got to talk about Trey Murphy because, again, like his stardom and his growth and his development over the course of this season, obviously going into last season, but more so this season and the jump that he's making, he is the reason that Brandon Ingram is, I don't want to call it expendable, but you feel as if you want to give Trey as much space and as much room to grow as you possibly can. My question to you, and this, we kind of started the pod this way. Did the Pelicans already get like a steal on his contract, right? Like, look at this season. We look at last season. We look at comparisons, but it's not the stats. Like, stats don't always tell the story of a player's development. You can have empty stats anywhere you go, right? But what you want to look at is how the player is getting to these stats. He's getting to the line at a rate that's at the top of the league. He already shoots at a rate that's at the top of the league. He's getting downhill and now starting to read the game a little bit easier. That is the sign of star power, where you're in control of the game, no matter who's on the court with you or who's on the court against you. And so from that standpoint, when you look at a contract where next year he makes 25 and then every year after that, it just goes up 2 million. So that in 4 years, he's making only 31 million. That's less money than what CJ McCollum makes today. Like, what are your thoughts on the ascension of Trey Murphy, where the Pelicans got him at, and how far he could potentially grow?
Yeah, Trey. I expected huge things from Trey Murphy this season, and he has like surprised even my expectations. I see some of the comments people talk about like Trey is not a better playmaker than Brandon Ingram. Nobody. I'm not comparing those two. I'm not. But Trey had 8 assists. Like he was hooping. Like I mean the ascension of Trey. So I tweeted yesterday, like what I think of when I look at a player and okay, we talking about stardom or we talking about is that when you turn up a player's usage rate, you give them the ball more, you give them more opportunities to have the ball in their hands more. Even if they've shown you something before, can they stay with the consistency? Can they stay with the efficiency? And since BI has been like out and not playing, like Trey has been the guy, the driving force of offense next to Zion for a good bit now. And you've seen, his last couple of games, like he's on a heater right now. But like he's been like really good this whole season. And now to the point where people are starting to double team Trey off of tip off, right? Like they tip the ball off and AD immediately would say, they are not playing. They're not giving Trey. No. Well, that's what happens when he drops 40 on you the game before. But they're doubling him with Zion on the floor. Like he's the other gravity guy. Like he's the other double team, can't let him get off guy. And and at that point, I'm like, you saw him kind of go mute for a little bit, right? Like he was trying to figure something. And then he started moving the ball and started passing the ball and started getting off of it and reading double teams. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's 3 chapters in the book down the look. You're supposed to still be trying to worry about being efficient scoring, but now you like reading double teams and making the right passes. That's like down the block when we talk about development. And he's already doing some of that now. Which was super, super impressive to watch. So when you look at that and you think about a guy who can shoot like he does and, and drive to the rim and make people make business decisions and things like that, like that's the kind of guy you pay a lot of money. I tell you what, you pay more than 33 to CJ. You pay Trey Murphy, you would pay a guy like that way more money. But here the Pelicans are getting Trey Murphy on contract on the books for a nice amount of time. And now you're looking at him in the first year before like the contract even starts saying, damn, he might be underpaid and his contract ain't even kicked in yet. And so I just this like his ascension and his ability to just he is a prototypical NBA predatory wing. And to a point where like there's not a lot of those in the NBA who can like create their own shot, but also pull up from the logo, off a catch and shoot. And he's just as dangerous off the ball as he is on the ball. And this is something you could never think that you would say about Trey Murphy going as close back as like last year. He's like, okay, he needs to work on this and get better and get in the weight room. Well, all of that is coming to culmination. So again, this is a season, obviously the standings are what they are. The record is what it is. This is a season to see how much you underpaid Trey Murphy. Give him the ball, feed him. Let him and him and Zion run pick and rolls, inverted pick and rolls. Let Zion set the screen for Trey. Let Trey set the screen for Zion. Get some stuff with him and Yves Missi. Like, okay, you're showing us things. Empower him. Give him the keys and see what you have in this guy. Because as great, and again, Brandon Ingram is a phenomenal, great player. Trey Murphy is probably a better fit next to Zion than Brandon Ingram as far as the game play goes, right? Don't need the ball, can be effective in that way and things like that. And so now with Trey on the on the rise and now basically the runway clear, see what you have from him. And I do think like this is another again, you don't want to talk about you all the things that you give the front office a lot of like gripe for. I will never argue with people about what you think the front office missed on. That's your opinion. I will fight to the end of the earth for you to have that opinion. But all I ask is that when national podcasts come out and they do things like all NBA best contracts team, and 3 of them are negotiated by the front office of the Pelicans, like you have to give them a little bit of credit for that. And now Trey Murphy is about to be there and things like that. And so I with that same, Trey Murphy's about to have the same kind of contract love moving forward, right? You're going to start to hear people talk about, man, Trey Murphy and that contract, and you're going to start hearing national talk about it. And I know that's usually when like opinions sway, but it's coming. It's the Pelicans they're not very good right now, and so people aren't watching. But it's coming, and people are going to start talking about Trey Murphy, and you'll realize how much of a good contract that Trey Murphy is on. So I do think the Pelicans did great work getting Trey locked up. Obviously, Herb's contract, and if you look at a guy like Jaden McDaniels and his and compare those two night and day as far as money goes, but like Herb is right up there, if not better, than Jaden McDaniels. And there's just a lot of good contracts on the Pelicans, and now there's one that you gotta deal with. But I do think that this Trey Murphy contract is going to look really, really good, and it's going to age better than a lot of other contracts that were given out this offseason. I mean, this season.
Yeah, the thing from Trey that stands out to me, we talk about getting to the free throw line, we talk about the consistency and the efficiency growing as the opportunity grows and the shot goes up and things like that, is that he's starting to learn how to use his body. Like he's starting to understand, oh yeah, I am 16 or 6'10". Oh yeah, I do have really long yards. Oh yeah, I can jump out the gym. Like you're starting to figure those things out, and like the light bulb's starting to turn on. And growth is not linear. AD likes to say it all the time. And you're seeing the steps. This is such a big jump from Trey from the previous 2 years when he kind of grew a little bit on defense and then took a step back and then kind of grew a little bit taking the ball off the ground. This is like a monumental jump. And I tweeted this out a couple days ago, maybe a week ago. If the Pelicans season wasn't horrid and they weren't losing so terribly, like Trey Murphy would be in the most improved conversation. Like go look at what he was doing last year, not stats wise, just the body of work and the skill set versus what he's doing this year. Like, again, I know it's not leading to wins, and I know it's hard to say that the Pelicans have the second worst record in the league, but like, I think teams will be lining up for a Trey Murphy at the deadline to offer him whatever he wanted on a Blake. Like, that is the prototypical player that you want in today's NBA in terms of long ability to shoot, ability to play off ball, ability to defend, ability to rim protect, ability to grow. And like those are the things that you want in a player. And so you hit it on the head in terms of why I think the Pelicans were comfortable going in this direction because of his skill set and what he does well and how well it pairs with what Zion does well as well. It's not one of those things where you have to make it work. Like even times when D Wade and LeBron got together and like different stars have come, they've had to figure out Luka and LeBron, how are we going to make it work with our two skill sets? Trey and Zion literally have the perfect skills to complement one another. One likes to go straight to the rim and one likes to stand beyond the half court line. And so you put those two things together and you continue to add pieces around it. Again, the Pelicans have drafted well. It's just these players aren't at where they need to be to win a championship versus players who are 30 and in their primes and things like that. And so as they slow build this thing and kind of take a couple steps back off the panic meter in terms of we need to win right now, I think Trey and his ascension this year has given them the confidence to do so. So this was a crazy, crazy deadline. This is a crazy, crazy change. David Griffin said this offseason, we've seen enough. There are going to be changes. There wasn't a whole lot of changes in the offseason. People freaked out. Well, there are a lot of changes now. And the Pelicans' dynamic duo has changed with Trey Murphy taking the spot of Brandon Ingram. What you got left for the people as the Pelicans wind down the back of the season and see what kind of chemistry they can build from here on out?
Yeah, I think it's best for everybody to remember that there was never going to be a perfect deal. There was never going to be a perfect move. You was gonna make some people happy. You're gonna make some people upset. And it's okay. Like it's okay. The Pelicans are gonna continue to play basketball. And it's okay, right? Like, it's okay. But I do think that it is going to be exciting to see what Trey's development is throughout this season. And then you'll have at the end of the season, you'll have an opportunity to start looking at some of the elite prospects, right? Because the Pelicans will have, will have another top pick. And listen, this whoever that person is will be coming into a fan base that will be expecting some things from them. But for now, I think it's the best thing to do is to watch the Pelicans for what fits with Zion and Trey. What fits around, Jordan Hawkins, and how can he get into the groove and implement him in the offense and things like that. And once the offseason comes, you start checking on the temperature of everything else, right? Trades, coaches, all of that is there. But for now, I think this is just the team that's going to be here. I think Brandon Boston's going to get his contract. But I think now it's time for you to just watch the Pelicans for Trey's development, for Zion's development, for Jordan Hawkins' development, and see just how far those guys, Trey and Zion, can develop as far as chemistry and as far as on the floor. And I think you're getting a good glimpse of what the Pels' future will look like. So with that being said, appreciate everybody coming through. You never know what people are going through, so give someone a smile today. As always, follow myself at Garrick_Rattler. Follow my brother at Raphael_Rattler. Follow the page at NO_basketball no E, and we'll see you guys in the next.